Now we're going to reassemble it. For reassembly, we're going to start with the trigger guard and lower receiver. Now if you look at the holes in the receiver, there's two pins, a large one and a small one. They're two different size pins. The large one is your trigger pin, the small one is your sear pin. Alright, when you're putting this back together, first thing I put in is the sear spring, followed by the sear, then the trigger spring. The arc on the sear spring faces up, and the bend or arc on the trigger spring faces down. Now the lovely part about this is these two springs are flat springs and they are identical. So if you get them mixed up, it's not going to matter as long as they're facing the correct direction inside the gun. If you look at the inside receiver, I told you I would show you that swaged pin for the sling swivel. That's the inside of the pin. There's the outside of the pin. And I'm not pulling that because if you look at the inside of that, it's swaged so that it doesn't come out. That means when they inserted it, they tapped it with something to kind of blend the two pieces of metal together. That marks the front of your trigger spring, or your trigger housing. The sear spring goes in the front, and it goes in the front with the arc facing up and screws into that hole there. So place it in there, line up the hole, make sure that the bend is facing up, and then insert the associated screw. Once you get the screw in place, take your screwdriver and screw it in. Screw it down until it's fully seated, and you can see once it's in, that spring faces up right there. Next thing to insert is the sear. Now when you're putting the sear in, imagine that this is the sear spring. The large part of the sear faces up just like the sear spring does and will set on top of the sear spring just like that, with both of them facing up. The small end with that bevel goes towards the back of the gun and sets underneath the trigger. So it'll be in the receiver just like this. This will actually go together fairly easy. You'll need a little bit of pressure to get the hole to line up because of that spring. Once you get the holes lined up, that pin should push in once you get it started. Use a nylon punch and then gently tap that in, and that spring will hold tension on that pin, and that pin will stay in place. Now your trigger goes in, obviously facing towards the front of the gun, with the curve towards the front of the gun, which again is where the sling swivel is. Insert it from the top, line up the hole, and drop the pin in. And once you get this cleaned up, that should go in fairly easy once you get the holes lined up. And that's all there is to that. Now watch that as you finish assembling that, because that pin will fall out very easy. Now as you can see, I did clean this up. I got all the rust off of this, and there was a lot. But in doing so, I didn't use any cleaning solvents. I just used a dry brush and time to get the rust cleaned off without affecting any of the patina. You can see the patina is still there. If you don't want patina, don't get an old gun. Now the trigger spring, again you want the trigger spring facing down so it will set inside the gun like this with that bend facing down. See that there's a flat piece in the back of the trigger right here. Only thing you need with that flat spring is make sure that it's above that, and I don't think that there's a way not to be honest with you. So it's going to set in here just like this. It won't engage anything right now. It doesn't engage anything until the hammer is cocked. So just set it in there, line up the holes just like that, and screw it in. There you go. Now the last spring is this big one. It also faces up. There's two holes in the back of this receiver. There's a hole towards the front and a hole towards the back. The hole towards the back is the hole where the stock is held in place, that machine screw from the stock. The hole in the front is where this spring goes. That spring faces up. So it just sets on there like that. Appropriate size screwdriver again. Get that screw. Just tighten that puppy down. You may have to hold it in place a little bit to keep it from twisting on you while you're tightening it down, but once it's tightened down, it's good to go. And there is your completely reassembled lower receiver or trigger group. Now the upper receiver. First thing I'm going to do with this upper receiver is I'm going to replace this pin, and then I'm going to replace the cleaning rod retainer, and then I'm going to attach the upper and lower receiver. To replace that pin, all you do is push it in and tap it in. Now these pins are old, and like this one is, you'll sometimes find that they're bent just a little bit, and that tiny little bit of bend is just enough to make those holes not line up very easy, and it might take some adjusting and playing around, maybe even another tool from the inside to finagle that to get it to line up. However, once you get it to line up, again, a nylon hammer so you don't mar your finish on your old gun, just tap that until it's flush. Check it on the other side, and that's in. Next thing to do is the retainer for the cleaning rod. Now these two pieces have to be done now. They have to be done before you attach the lower receiver or the trigger guard, otherwise you are not going to be able to get to them. For the cleaning rod retainer, this hole right here where you can see the threads on the barrel is threaded and receives the threads on this little retainer. Again, there's two holes in it, a large hole and a small hole. Just make sure that when you tighten it down, tighten it all the way down, and make sure that the large hole, correction, faces towards the muzzle. So if you over tighten it, you just back it off slightly so that the hole is lined up properly for the receiving of the cleaning rod. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to connect these two pieces, the upper and lower receiver. Make sure you have your two little screws handy. They only go in one way. One side of the receiver is threaded to receive the thread ends. The other side of the receiver is not threaded, but does have a relief cut to receive the head of the screw. So make sure you put it in the correct direction. This spring is going to set up against that pin that we just put in. So in order to get that hole lined up, once you get that in there to line up with this hole here, that's going to take a little bit of pressure to get that hole lined up. Because of that, I usually do that one first. Also, while you put this in, if you've cleaned this up well enough, that pin is going to be loose and it's going to keep trying to slide out, and it's going to get in your way. So make sure that stays centered. Slide the upper and lower together. There. Now once you get that in, take your appropriate size screwdriver and screw that in. You don't have to tighten it all the way down. Just screw it in far enough that it will help guide your second screw. Line up the holes on the second one. Put that in. Now you can tighten both of those down. There you go. Next thing I'm going to do on here is put the front sight back together. For the front sight, you're going to want the flat spring that goes with it. You want the retainer pin that holds the elevation piece on, and you want the elevation piece. Alright, to assemble the sights, take your flat spring with the bend facing up. Go ahead and place that in, line up the hole, and screw that down. Screw that down all the way. So put the drift pin in, get it started until it just barely is not through that first side. Place your elevation piece in. There's a little keyhole shaped end up here that goes around that screw. Push that down and then work that pin in. And there's your front sight. Now let's go ahead and put the wood back on. To put the wood back on, we'll put the front on first. That tab on the wood goes inside the square shaped hole here, just like this. Put it in there and then rock the wood into place until it is seated along the entire length of the barrel. Take the largest ring and insert it, spinning it to clear that lug, wrapping it around the wood, and seating it all the way down until it is in its position. I will actually put all 3 rings on prior to tightening them down. You don't have to do that. The sling swivel it goes on the middle piece. Again, around the lug, slide it to its stop point, and you'll know where the stop point is because of the indentation in the wood. The wood actually changes size where the rings go. And then the last one. Now for cosmetic reasons, try to get the screws the same on the same side all the way across. Once you get those in place, just go through and tighten them down. Once those are all in place, you can take the cleaning rod and insert it. Now keep in mind, the cleaning rod is going to go in the same way it came out. However much difficulty you had removing it, you can probably double that to reinsert it. But it sits into the groove. Slide it all the way down. And you'll see right here where it disappears into the wood. And then back here is where that piece is that it screws into, that threaded piece. So slide that all the way down, and just like you did when you took it out, if you're lucky you can turn it by hand. If not, put something in there to turn it. Put some downward force on it while you turn it to make sure that it engages the threads. I'm not going to make you watch me screw it in all the way. Right, now that we've got the wood back on the rear, or on the front of the gun, we'll put it on the rear of the gun. Slides in just like this from the top, or from the rear, with the comb, the cheek comb of course, facing up. Slide that in until it stops, which should align those screws. Take that machine screw, slide it through that hole, and screw it in. There you go. Now we're going to reassemble the rolling block. If you took the plug out of the rolling block in order to clean it, you can put that in first because it actually does not engage anything. Just put it into the side. There's usually one side smaller than the other. Tapered end in using a nylon hammer or a nylon drift punch, whichever you prefer. Tap that until it's flush. You can roll it over. The hole on the large side, that's where your firing pin goes. Obviously with the nipple towards the front of the gun. And then this groove that's cut in there, that screw is going to fit in that groove and allowing enough play for the firing pin to move back and forth when it's struck. So that groove needs to face the hole. So insert it into the large end of the hole with the flat part facing out. Insert the screw. Get that screw tightened down. The block is reassembled. That covers the reassembly of the block. Next thing we're going to do is insert the extractor. When you insert the extractor, the nipple on that spring fits into the cutout on the extractor, so the extractor has room to slide back and forth around that nipple. When you insert the extractor, that L-shaped bevel goes into the gun facing down, so it goes in to this slot right here. Slide it all the way in, slide it in until it's flush, put that screw in, tighten down that screw, and your extractor's in place. Now at this point, all we have left is a field stripped Husqvarna. When you reassemble it, you've got your 2 giant push pins, the locking screws, the hammer, and the rolling block. Hammer goes in first, and it'll go in a fired position. Like when you put it in, it will go in a position as if it was fired. So put it in, you'll see the hole doesn't line up. Rock it forward and keep rocking it forward until the hole lines up without having to put any pressure on the spring. You want the hole to line up with no pressure on the spring, so it just free floats. Insert the pin. Once it's in, pull it back until it clicks. That's your pre-fired position. Pull it all the way back until it cocks, and then before you go any further with the assembly, just make sure it's going to work. So put your finger on there so it doesn't take off on you, and then just pull the trigger to make sure it releases properly. And then recock it. Once you have it recocked, take the hammer, or correction, the rolling block, and install the rolling block. The pin portion of the firing pin facing towards the front, striking pin towards the back, striking surface rather towards the back, and insert that into the receiver. That one you will need a little bit of pressure on the springs to get it to line up. Once you get it lined up, push that pin in. Now both of these pins have little moon-shaped cutouts on them right there and right there. They need to face towards your locking mechanism. If you have the single piece like on an actual Remington 1, they need to face in so that that plate sets between them and are held in by that screw. On these Swedish rifles, turn them until they line up with that hole, like that. And then your locking screw will fit in there next to them to keep them from coming out. Now that locking screw works just like any screw. Just put it in there and tighten it down. And then it has a cutout on it also. What you want to do is make sure that that cutout does not line up with the cutout on the pin, because it's the screw fitting over the lip on the pin that keeps the pin from backing out. If you turn that so that that cutout is over the top of that pin, then that still will allow the pin to back out. Now to just do a field strip for cleaning, you don't have to take these screws all the way out. All you have to do is turn them like that so that they line up with the indentation on the retaining pin, and that will actually allow that pin to be knocked out. That lip on that pin is held in place by turning that screw far enough so that they don't line up. Those two. Once you get that done, you now have a completely reassembled rifle. Double check it, half cock, shouldn't fire, full cock, rolling block. When you pull the rolling block back, it should pull the ejector or extractor out back. Seat that forward, pull the trigger. Fully functioning rifle.